Welcome to, hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Water Policy and Legislation Committee and special meeting of the Board of Directors of the West Basin Municipal Water District, January 11, 2024. It is now 1:02. I'm calling this meeting to order. Do we have a quorum, Mr. General Manager? Could you take the attendance roll, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Director Don Deere. Here. Chairwoman Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston.
Here.
Director Harold Williams.
Here.
Director Desi Alvarez. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Item 3, public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who wish to speak?
Madam Chair, we have not received any requests for public comment, though I do know that there are people joining us virtually. If there's anybody that would like to make a public comment, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And Madam Chair, I do not see any requests for public comment.
Thank you. Item 4, presentations. Do we have any presentations?
We have no presentations for today.
And item 5, action calendar, 5A. Mr. General Manager, please introduce the item.
Yes, Madam Chair, the first item that we have for you is 5A. It's the Low Income Household Water Assistance Program Establishment Act. And for this presentation, we have Matt Bay, our Manager of Water Policy and Resources.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, directors. I'm now on page 3 of the agenda packet. I'd like to follow along. And for this item, staff is recommending that this committee or adopt a support position on the Low Income Household Water Assistance Program Establishment Act as authored by Senator Alex Padilla. The proposed legislation would establish a national low-income water assistance program that would benefit ratepayers in some of the disadvantaged and low-income communities located in the West Basin service area. Similar policy was enacted in late 2020, kind of following the start of the pandemic, when Congress created the first ever national water assistance program aimed at maintaining water and wastewater services in the midst of the worldwide pandemic that affected the ability of ratepayers to pay their bills due to health issues, job losses, et cetera. That program, which has helped citizens in California, in LA County, and other states, it helped them to pay down their current and past due water and wastewater bills. That program was previously extended, but it's now set to expire on March 31st of this year. I did speak with our federal lobbyist earlier this morning. He indicated that it's not likely to be extended again. I think Senator Alex Padilla is trying to get some support for possibly getting some funding into this year's funding measures, but there's not a whole lot of traction as of yet. So for all intents and purposes, it looks like that program will expire. So since the pandemic has ended, there continues to be a need to help our low income and disadvantaged residents pay their monthly water and wastewater bills in an environment I think that we're all familiar with, where inflation has significantly driven up the cost of essential goods and services. So to address the expiration of this program, which would cause a funding gap, Senator Padilla is introducing legislation that would put a long-term program into place. This legislation would direct Health and Human Services in coordination with the EPA, the US EPA, to make grant funding available to states and tribes, who would in turn provide funding to owners and operators of public water systems or treatment works to assist those low-income households in paying late fees and arrearages for the drinking and wastewater services. Low-income households would be identified explicitly in the bill as those receiving assistance from one or more existing federal programs. Those eligible households would further be required to meet certain low-income thresholds. I do want to note that the bill has yet to be officially introduced, but again, in talking with VSA this morning, it's really looking like that bill will be introduced by Senator Padilla in the next couple of weeks. And so in the meantime, his office is seeking out support, proactive support for this bill. As a wholesale water provider with a significant number of low income and disadvantaged communities in our service area, staff does believe that West Basin is well positioned to take a support position on this bill. In addition to all of the benefits that would be provided by such a program to many of our low income, would also benefit the district to have a support position on the proposed legislation ahead of our Washington, D.C. visit that's going to take place in mid-April as a means of conveying support for Senator Padilla and what is coming to be his expanding role as a water policy leader in the nation's capital. A couple final things to note is that there is no funding mechanism currently provided in this draft version of the bill. And as we all know, we are entering a very contentious election year, which could make it difficult for the bill to move forward. But I don't think that that should deter us from supporting good policy that would benefit West Basin in our service area. So with that said, I would like to reiterate that staff is recommending a support position on this bill, and that we would like to convey our support to the senator's office as he readies the legislation for introduction. Should you concur with staff's recommendation today, this item will next go to the full board for consideration of adoption at the board meeting later this month. And that completes my prepared remarks on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the legislation or our recommended position.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the staff recommendation.
Oh, Mac, I'm sorry, I lost you. Hello?
Hi, this is Don. I just made the motion to approve the recommendation on this item. We need a second. Second.
Well, this is the committee, so it's really just.
It's just whether it would move to the full board.
Right.
Okay, that's not my motion.
Hello,
I have a
this-
question.
I lost the call, but I'm back online. Director Houston, I heard you say you had a question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. I just had a really brief question, and that is, I know it's early, but is there any opposition at this time, or is there any foreseeable opposition to this that we're aware of yet?
Haven't foreseen any opposition. We haven't been made aware of any opposition yet that I'm aware of, but we can certainly look into that a little bit more to see before the board meeting to let you know if there is any registered yet.
And what about other supporters? I mean, again, we're really early here, but are the water districts or is Aqua looked at this just yet? I haven't heard.
Haven't heard if Aqua, yeah, Aqua hasn't taken, their first meeting's next week. So that would be when they would potentially consider taking a support position. I know that Eastern, who's another of BSA's clients, has already submitted a letter of support. I am looking into whether or not Metropolitan might take that as well. So again, that could be another piece of information that I bring to the board before the board meeting for final. Yeah.
I'm just the alternate, so, you know, members are here, but, or they can, just report it, we all know the crisis across the United States. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Deere, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Did you have any questions?
No, I don't. I'm just moving that we support it.
Okay. I I certainly support any effort to address this particular legislation, and I am interested to see what other groups do support it, and I think it's great that the senator is introducing it. I believe I heard Matt say long-term program rather than short-term. I know there has been discussion at Metropolitan, and there's a committee that's addressing support for low-income areas. In fact, there was a workshop that was this week on it, a panel on it, that discussion. I do have a question though. If this bill passes and so forth, how much of our district is actually impacted by this?
Well, it would be up to the state. The state would receive the initial funding from the federal government And then they would kind of set up a program to pass along that funds to counties. I think there's a couple of agencies out there that each county kind of works with to administer the current program, the current low income program. So I would imagine that that's how they'll kind of do that with the long-term version, but I think that would still need to be determined once the legislation actually passes. So I would imagine they would work with either nonprofits or other organizations to distribute that funding to counties and other eligible entities.
I believe I read in the
Yeah.
summary of this, staff summary that they estimated 20% of our district would be there.
Is low income.
Yes, that's correct. Up to, yeah, I think actually between 30 and 40% is kind of our current estimate for our
Yeah,
service
yeah,
area.
that was the question. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Matt. That was really so about 20 to 30%. And that funding would be administered through our retail agencies and any nonprofits is what I understand, since we don't deal directly with our constituents. Okay. All right.
That's correct.
Yes, I do support it along with Director Deere. Correct, Director Deere?
Yes.
Yes. So we support the recommendation. All right,
Thank you very
if
much,
there's no
Madam
other
Chair.
Thank you. If no other questions, we will move to item 6, information calendar 6A. Mr. General Manager.
Yes, Madam Chair, the item before you is item 6A. It's a West Basin draft policy principles for 2024 legislative, regulatory priorities. And for this presentation, we have Matt Bay again for the presentation.
Thank you, EJ. I'm now on page 17 of the agenda packet. And I'm excited to bring this item to the Water Policy Committee today for further discussion and consideration. In presenting this item, our goal is to answer questions and receive any feedback from directors that you might have about the proposed policy principles and 2024 legislative priorities that are currently in draft form. Staff will take any feedback or suggested edits that come from this committee today or in the coming days and incorporate those into an updated draft that would then go to the full board for further discussion and possible adoption. I want to point out that we did share these draft concepts with both our federal and state advocacy teams for their input. VSA, our federal team, expressed support for the proposed principles, and they did not have any other suggested edits or additions. Our state advocacy team, Neomela Pappas, also thought we did a good job with putting these together, but they did have a couple of additional suggestions for us to consider. Unfortunately, we posted online before we were able to get those that feedback into the draft. So our plan is to review those and possibly include those in the version that would go to the full board. So I'll be sure to point these out in the board memo so that you can review those ahead of time. And I think it was just maybe 2 or 3 potential ones that NPA weighed in on. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to review the draft language, which is included as attachment A, and that begins on page 20 of the agenda packet. I'm happy to go through any of the draft language with you if you have specific questions or general thoughts. We can do this now or later. I would like to note this is not something new to West Basin. While it's been a while since we've gone through this sort of process, West Basin's board has previously adopted policy principles to help guide and strengthen our policy actions taken by the agency. I also want to mention that this is something that many water agencies and municipalities do on an annual basis, including Metropolitan Water District and a good portion of its member agencies. And in fact, Metropolitan's board is currently considering, I think they're looking at creating a legislative ad hoc committee to explore how to maximize the effectiveness of its legislative platform and activities. So one of the primary goals of establishing these guiding policy principles is to align the board's priorities with the government affairs activities that staff carries out each legislative year, which we believe should really help the district maximize our engagement efforts with our legislators, the regulators, partner agencies, and other stakeholders. Staff believes the draft principles and priorities that are before you today not only closely align with our organizational mission, but really also capture who West Basin is, what we do, and what's important to us in our communities. We definitely want to hear your thoughts on the draft language we have developed for your consideration, but we do feel strongly that these are foundational policy concepts that have long been supported by not only the current board of directors, but by past boards as well. West Basin, as you know, has a great track record of supporting and opposing, engaging on policies that align with the board's priorities. Over the years, the district has actively engaged on critical policy issues such as water recycling, desalination, water efficiency, and many others that have really made a mark on the industry. It's also, I think, very important to staff that the development of these policy principles and priorities be an iterative process that we can build upon and refine in future years based on the evolving state of federal and state issues and other needs of the board and organization. We view any action that the board takes this month as really just a starting point that we intend to carry forward on a regular basis in future years. And as such, we see this as a living document that we'll review each year in coordination with the board to ensure that the district is focusing its attention and resources and outreach efforts on the most critical and pressing policy issues at hand. This will allow us to work more seamlessly with our state and federal advocacy teams, as well as the many other external partners that we have to pursue policy solutions that reflect our needs and values. Most importantly, adopting these will put more weight behind the positions that the board adopts throughout the year, as staff and the board will be able to point, they'll be able to point to the adopted guidelines that were put forth by the board when working in support of or against proposed legislation or regulation. This could also allow us some additional flexibility to work more proactively on policy issues in situations where a bill hasn't been introduced quite yet, or if we're pursuing legislation ourselves or in coordination with others. Finally, I just want to convey to the board that the draft principles before you today were developed to provide flexibility and adaptability with regard to policies that benefit us and our communities. There are some agencies who have incredibly detailed and comprehensive sets of policy principles. However, I feel like in some situations that can actually work against an organization by slowing down or kind of muddying the waters of what's the best decision. Is that based on their policies they've said in the past versus looking forward? So I think in crafting these for you to review today, we did not make them overly specific or prescriptive, as I want to make sure that the board retains its ability to be flexible and to adapt its policy positions to meet the needs of the organization. With that said, staff welcomes the board's direction on updating the initial draft version that we have for you to ensure that sufficient detail is available to make decisions and to take needed actions in an appropriate manner. So at this time, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I now turn it over to the committee for further discussion and questions for staff.
All right, thank you, Matt. Director Derrick, do you have any input at this point?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right, Director Houston.
Yes, let me say just a couple things and very quickly. I want to say thank you, Matt. Now, I didn't look at last year's, obviously, lately. Is this much different than last year or in the past? Y'all tweaked it much, or is it?
So we have actually not done this for a number of years. I think EJ maybe did this before, but I don't know how many years it's been, but we did not have any policy principles or legislative priorities in place last year. So this would kind of be a new beginning, new process for us.
Good. Excellent. Well, funny thing is, because I didn't read it before the meeting, I was writing notes to myself, but then I see you guys hit almost everything I was thinking of. So FYI, like item 4 says Director Reeves. I think that's tremendous to support those types of policies, right? DPR. Item 6, you got the removing of non-functional turf in public and commercial areas, because I wanted to make sure we focused on anything in the future with turf removal or legislative priorities. Number 7, water affordability. You got it in here. The only thing I can think of that I would like you to figure out how to put in here, remember we were talking about chemicals, we were talking about supply chains, we were talking about the costs, logistics, and also and there is probably, lack of suppliers in the United States on some things. So I would like, when we go to these legislative trips, we make sure we emphasize that to our state and federal folks, but also price should be somehow incorporated in here, whether it's standalone or one of the other lists you've got going on. So just that's my only feedback.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback, and I'll make sure it's in the next version.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Director Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to say that things that I am concerned about, I've heard talked about, and I will not take up any more time. And I appreciate Director Houston for his comments. Thank you.
Okay, staff, I am okay with what you presented, and thank you for what you've done. And thank you to the board for their input, Director Houston and others. So with that, we will just move to item 6B, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Item 6B is our state and federal legislative updates for the month of December 2023. And again, for this presentation, we have Matt Bay.
Thank you, EJ. Directors, I'm now on page 25 of the agenda packet. And the monthly state report from Nemela Pappas, our state advocate, was sent to directors and is also being posted to the meeting chat for anybody from the public who wishes to review the report. So state legislators are officially back now in Sacramento for the second half of the 23-24 legislative session. And while we expect a very busy and packed year with lots of issues being considered, the state budget will certainly be one of the major topics early in the year. A considerable budget deficit is currently projected for the next year, which could have cascading effects on legislation, on the climate bond that we're interested in, and existing state-funded programs and grants. So yesterday, Governor Newsom actually submitted his initial January budget proposal for the year. We'll be sure to have a more detailed summary of that budget and its priorities at next month's committee meeting. But I wanted to provide just a few quick highlights on that. The total proposed budget is nearly $300 billion for fiscal year 24-25. It also reflects the administration's estimate of a nearly $40 billion deficit, although there have been other sources and analysts in recent weeks that have predicted an even larger deficit that in some is up to $70 billion. Unfortunately, the proposal does appear to make some funding reduction proposals to several water-related areas, including watershed climate resilience, recycled water, flood protection, and PFAS treatment, among others. I think there is some hope that some of those funding cuts in the areas of recycled water and climate resilience will be shifted to that climate bond that's currently under consideration. But we'll all see how that kind of plays out over the course of the year. The governor will release a revised budget in May, with final legislative approval needing to be achieved by June 15th. And because this is the second year of a legislative session, in addition to all of the new bill introductions that happened at this time of year, there's also a good number of bills that were introduced last year that need to get out of their House of Origin by the end of January. That means there's a pretty accelerated timeline for any bills that got held up and carried over this year. There are a couple of bills of interest that West Basin's board currently has support positions on that fall into this category of two-year bills. Senate Bill 867 is the proposed climate resilience bond that Senator Ben Allen is the author of and that we've been actively engaging with, while Senate Bill 366 is a bill by Senator Ana Caballero that would establish long-term water supply targets. We definitely hope to see both of these proposed measures move forward in the new year, although based on what we've heard, it's a little more likely that the bond proposal will progress through the legislature while SB 366 gets left behind unless it's significantly amended. Another upcoming important date to note is February 16th, so just over a month from now, and that's the date by which all new bills must be introduced. So we've got about a month for all bills to be introduced, so it's definitely going to be a busy time of year. Now firmly in his new role as Speaker of the Assembly, Assemblymember Robert Rivas recently announced the full lineup of committee memberships for the coming year. There didn't seem to be any major shakeups that have been noted on those committee assignments, but we'll continue to work with NPA to track this and analyze it in the coming weeks. I did include an attachment that shows all of the new assembly committees and members that was provided to the directors and is also put to the chat for download. And then on the topic of Assembly Speaker Rivas, I have some really great news to announce that the speaker will be meeting with West Basin, coming to visit us on next Friday, January 19th at the Edward C. Little facility to get a district update and to discuss priorities for the coming year. I want to start by thanking Director Houston, who really put this into motion by working with our state advocacy team, Neemela Pappas, to put an invitation out to Speaker Rivas's office to visit our facility and to speak with West Basin. So thank you, Director Houston, for that. I also want to point out and recognize the efforts of Jamie Miner and Emily Pappas from our state advocacy team for making this happen. They have really good relationships with the speaker's office, and so they were instrumental in getting this to happen. He is based out of Northern California, so to be able to get an hour of his time during a visit down to LA is a tremendous opportunity for the district. We definitely hope that the directors can look at their schedules and work with our team to see if they can be part of that meeting next week. And while changes have been happening on the Assembly side of things, in the Senate, no changes have really occurred yet. But we would expect that to change in the next few weeks once the new Senate Pro Tem, Mike McGuire, Northern California, takes over for outgoing Pro Tem Tony Atkins from San Diego on February 5th. Switching kind of topics here a little bit, there was another major kind of newsworthy story last week with regard to the state's conservation framework regulations. When the state's independent legislative analyst office, the LAO, they released a pretty critical report on the proposed regulations that finds they will create a number of different challenges for water suppliers in meeting those requirements. The LAO, which is a well-respected and nonpartisan organization, has recommended the State Water Board simplify several parts of the regulations, which, if unchanged, would greatly impact not only water suppliers in trying to comply with those requirements, but could have kind of downstream impacts on customers and ratepayers. According to the LAO, these regulations would set such burdensome standards for outdoor use that suppliers would have little ability and wiggle room to comply. The LAO also warned that the added cost will ultimately be borne by customers, and particularly low-income communities. The report recommends that lawmakers direct the State Water Board to make several of the requirements less stringent, such as the outdoor standard, consider how to get state funding to assist lower-income communities, and extend some of the deadlines, which are set to begin next year, for suppliers to achieve those goals. The final regulations are expected to be adopted this summer, so there's definitely still some time for the State Water Board to find some middle ground with water suppliers. We had a call yesterday with Aqua, a huge coalition of 100 people throughout the state talking about this, and we do think that the State Water Board is likely to make some concessions on this, which is good. We'll definitely continue to keep the board apprised of further developments on this issue as it unfolds. And then just a few other updates. First, in late December, the State Water Board approved new regulations related to direct potable reuse. This has been a very long and involved process, multi-years, with public comment being taken on the proposed regulations last summer. And then that concluded last month when the final version of the regs were presented to and adopted by the board. The new regulations still need to be finalized through the Office of Administrative Law later this year, which is essentially a procedural requirement. But once that process concludes, water suppliers would then be able in submitting DPR projects plans to the board for consideration and approval. The regs were reviewed multiple times by industry experts and representatives from throughout the water community, And it was determined that public health is well protected through the regulations provisions, which was one of the main objectives of this process. And then I just want to note that you all know West Basin has a long history of shaping policy around indirect and direct potable reuse. So it was really great to see kind of some of the fruits of that labor come into view and to find resolution here in the last month or so. Also wanted to share that in late December, DWR approved the Delta Conveyance Project and certified the environmental impact report for the project. I know that Tammy's going to talk a little bit more about that, so I'll just skip that for now, but I think Tammy will give you a little more information about that. I also know that you received a great presentation from Nina Hawk of Metropolitan last week during the caucus, so a lot of information that you've probably heard already. And then finally, the State Water Board recently selected a new executive director. Eric Oppenheimer is his name. He was the deputy director for the last 7 or 8 years. He's replacing Eileen Sobek in the executive role. This is a little bit of an opinion on my part here, but whereas Sobek seemed to operate very well, but kind of quietly and behind the scenes in her leadership role at the board, Oppenheimer has more often been in the public eye for the actions and policy decisions taken by the organization in recent years. There's a lot of big issues that the state board is facing, so it'll definitely be interesting to see how the staff side of the State Water Board evolves under the new leadership. And then last but not least, on the state side, I want to thank the directors for working with staff to identify the dates of our spring 2024 Sacramento and Washington, D.C. trips. We will be headed up to Sacramento on March 5th and 6th with our trip to Washington, D.C. set for the week of April 15th. We're already working very closely with our state and federal lobbyists to start scheduling meetings and working to update the legislative briefing book that we'll use when we meet with each office. We have also already ordered all of the Legislator of the Year awards that will be handed out to the recipients during each trip. Looking at our state trip, we currently have the following offices identified as proposed meetings. I'll go through these quickly now, but if there are any additional offices not mentioned here that the directors would like to add to the list, please let me know and we'll communicate that to the NPA team. So right now we have all of our delegation, which includes Senator Ben Allen, Senator Stephen Bradford, Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas, Assemblymember Jackie Irwin, Assemblymember Rick Chavez Burr, Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, Assemblymember Mike Gibson, Assemblymember Almer Suchi, Assemblymember Tina Simone McKenna, and Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal. And then we have one additional award that we're giving out to Senator Ana Caballero. So we have 11 total meetings right now that NPA is already working on. But again, if there's additional members that you think we should meet with, please feel free to either suggest those now or as you think of them later. We still have a good bit of time to set those up. That concludes my state report. Please let me know if you have any questions before I move over to the federal affairs update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of questions for Matt, if it's okay.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you, Matt. Really good report. Really fast. Assemblymember Jackie Irwin. Did I miss that or?
Yeah, yes, she is part of the, yes, she is. Yep.
I don't know who or if there's a reason, but is there a reason maybe to try and get a meeting with the State Water Board? I'm not sure what we would 100% talk about, but maybe that's part of the conversation of concessions and some other things. So, you know, if you need to think about that.
We will. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That was one question that I had, is if we wanted to try to meet with any of the administration organizations while we were up there, potentially them or DWR.
Right.
So we can talk with NPA as well and see what makes sense.
I know it may be a challenge and there's a lot of people who are trying already, but it's thought. Let me just say a couple things really quick. I mean, number one, thank you. And I'm really glad that Steve Rivas is coming with us Friday, right next Friday. I mean, that's huge. That's tremendous. I know he's really interested in water issues, so I think that's great for West Basin. Do you all know, and that I have not had time to look at the budget information came out yesterday. I mean, pretty unpopular, okay? But you mentioned there's a reduction in recycled water funding that in his first round. I mean, is there any, what does that mean? Off the top of your head, do you know?
So there was an analysis that NPA sent over. I looked at it briefly. I know that they're going to maintain some of the funding that was in place last year, but I think that we were hoping that there'd be additional levels of funding for recycled water, and it looks like he's kind of pulled some of that away for now. But I can get you like the full accounting of what that looks like. I can send that out to the board of what the actual numbers are. Because I don't know them offhand, but I know it's not all of the funding, but it's a partial pullback of some of the funding.
Okay, good. And then when you talk about from the NPA, the legislative analysis, critique,
Yes.
and I think we all sent an article to us and I saw that about it, but was that the legislation from, did that legislation originally?
Yeah, that was the original 2018 legislation, 1668, SB 606. Those are the regulations that started going into effect really this year with the first annual report due from water suppliers this year. And then next year, they'll have to actually report their water use objectives and whether or not they're meeting it. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, there'll be other milestones that'll have to be met from water suppliers on assessing their CII systems, coming into compliance with non-functional turf use. There's a whole number of things, but it stemmed out of that legislative package. And it's about a 30-page document, so it's not too bad to get through. I definitely encourage you to read through it if you get a chance. It'll help you understand some of the issues with.
Let me just ask, because you said you were on an call where they were talking about it.
Yes.
And had concerns with other agencies, but is there a way you all can just write a synopsis of what the concerns were brought up on the call? So we just are aware, because I know Aqua obviously is going to be talking about all this and, I'm on the state committee, so but it's good for us just to know, but just the high level. I just would love to hear what was being brought up, because I think we should have an understanding.
Absolutely.
I think that's it. I mean, I know that, a lot of talk to see what bonds may or may not come together for later in the year. But you all would just take into consideration the things I asked and send that to the board. Oh, one last thing. I know I've already said this maybe to you, but, the great thing is Isaac Ryan's chair of natural resources, so that's really big for district, so I'm looking forward to meet with him. Sacramento, of course, we need to have him come visit the plant at some point. One of our assembly members, that's a good chair position he has, so. All right, that's all I got. Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Deere,
Yes,
any questions or any comments?
not at this time. Thank you.
Hey, Director Williams,
Pass, thank you.
I think, Matt, thank you for the report and look forward to more discussion about it. And the next item, I believe, is Metropolitan Water District report. Mr. General Manager.
That's correct, Madam Chair. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst.
Good afternoon, board members. So this report summarizes updates on Colorado River Supply, the Northern California Bay Delta, and the second lower feeder pipeline, and then we'll conclude with the water supply conditions. So please feel free to ask any questions or provide any comments when you have at any time. As you can see on the screen, this report begins on page 27 of the committee packet. So first off, with the Colorado River Supplies, the revised draft supplemental environmental impact statement. As you know, the 2007 interim guideline for the Colorado River operation, those will expire in 2026. And last October, Reclamation had released a revised version of this draft and for the near-term operation. And that public period ended in December. And that revision was a result of a response letter that was submitted by the 3 lower basin states that was submitted to Reclamation. And specifically the lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada, had agreed to both of the no action alternative and the proposed alternative that would be in that supplemental environmental impact statement. They agree that the proposed alternative provides a reasonable range of alternative to reduce the risk of reaching critical lake elevation. So we'll keep you posted and updated as this continues to develop. And then regarding the operating guidelines for 2026, collaboration still is going on among the 7 Colorado River Basin states in developing the post-2026 operating guidelines. A draft environmental impact statement is anticipated to be released towards the end of this calendar year. And in preparation for this effort, the Colorado River Basin states, they have continued to have technical meetings to prepare a variety of elements that could be included in the guidelines. And that would be data under different operational scenarios that could help in future decision-making in those operation guidelines. And then regarding historic agreements, last month at the Colorado River Water Users Conference, a lot was going on. And specifically the highlight, one of the bigger highlights is that the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation had signed historic water conservation agreements with California water agencies. And they're provided by funding that was made available by the Inflation Reduction Act of federal funding to help meet the state commitment to, this will help meet California's statement or commitment to conserve 1.6 million acre feet through 2026. These agreements are a key part of the Lower Basin Plan to conserve 3 million acre feet of water by 2026. There are additional agreements that are anticipated to be signed this year with the Bard Water District, the Coachella Valley Water District, and the Imperial Irrigation District. So a lot of activity happening in this area. And then looking back in this past calendar year, 2023, Metropolitan has reported that the California's water use was at an all-time lowest level since 1949. And Metropolitan's conservation commitment has left more than 400,000 acre feet of water in Lake Mead as a result of the financial federal aid that has helped with their land fallowing programs. So that concludes Colorado River update. And then moving on to the next page for Bay Delta activities in Northern California. So on December 21st, last month, DWR did certify the environmental impact report for the Delta Conveyance Project. And the next steps will involve engineering, design, permitting. DWR will move forward to seek additional permits related, federal and state permits that are needed to be applicable to this project. And then the Delta Conveyance Project is a key project or a key part of California's water, as you know. It's a key part of California's water resiliency portfolio. It aims to modernize the state's water infrastructure. And there are several public agencies that are involved and participating in this project that include the Bay Area, the Central Valley, Central Coast, and Southern California, including Metropolitan. So yeah, a lot of big news on that. There's been a lot of activity in the past several years. And now we're seeing that environmental impact report is certified, and we'll continue watching further developments in that area as well. Regarding Delta Island activities, so Metropolitan Multi-Benefit Landscape Restoration Planning Grant for Delta Island from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's in its final phase of developing conceptual design plans for 6 recommended pilot projects and scientific research studies specifically for Golden Island. And the primary objective of that grant was to assist in identifying opportunities that can address land subsidence, habitat restoration, and many other environmental issues. There will be a report that is anticipated to be completed in March, and we'll keep a lookout for that as well. And then next, regarding Science Reservoir, this is a project that is an off-stream water storage project that will improve water reliability throughout California. It will be located just north of the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. a planned project that would store up to 1.5 million acre feet of excess surface water that could be used for supply during drought periods. So the Sites Project Authority is a lead agency under the California Environmental Quality Act. And last November, the Joint Reservoir Committee and Sites Authority Board meeting, the Sites Authority Board certified the final environmental impact report and approved that project as well. And as we heard Matt mentioned at the last caucus meeting, so there's a lot of information that was provided by Metropolitan's representative that was pretty informational as well. So construction of this project is anticipated to begin in 2026 and anticipated to finish by 2030. And then lastly, regarding the pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe reliability program, this is a multi-year program to enhance reliability of Metropolitan distribution system. So information about this program has been recently brought to this committee a few times already. Just a brief update, a portion of the second lower feeder will be relined about 3.7 miles as part of Reach 3B. And that is located throughout the cities of Torrance, Lomita, and Los Angeles. So just a brief update, the contractor had completed a temporary bypass line at the Palos Verdes Reservoir, and that line will ensure that all service connections will remain in service during this construction period, so there should be no interruption while Metropolitan can perform this work. Traffic control activities have commenced in preparation for that shutdown. So phase 1 of this Reach 3B is scheduled to be completed by May 2024. And phase 2 is scheduled to begin again in November 2024 and scheduled to be completed by May 2025. And then moving on regarding board meeting actions, included in this report under attachment A summarizes the items that were heard and acted upon at the Metropolitan Board last December. Attachment B includes a copy of the board meeting votes. The information for the items to be considered in January were not yet available at the time of this writing of this report, which was why it wasn't. And then lastly, moving on to the water supply conditions. This is shown on page 34 of the committee. So on the first page, on the left side, on the green shaded area of the State Water Project, as of December 26th, the Lake Oroville Reservoir is at 67% capacity. And then shown in this graphic is the snow water content for the Sierra regions. It's representing only 27% of normal. On the right side for the Colorado River Basin, this graph showed Lake Powell to be at 35% capacity and then Lake Mead at 34% capacity. And then if we take a look at the second page, it shows the storage. Thank you for the, it shows the storage reserve for the two major watersheds in California and Colorado. And the State Water Project in that green shaded area, the Northern Sierra snowpack conditions are trending low and below normal. Last week, on January 2nd, DWR had conducted their first manual snow survey. It only recorded 7.5 inches of snow depth and a snow water equivalent of only 3 inches, which is the equivalent of 30% storage at this time. After one of the largest snowpacks that we've seen last year, record season. So this is very, very dry in comparison to that. So the box just below that for Lake Oroville, that indicates that there is 1.3 million acre feet more in storage compared to last year. Lake Oroville currently has 2.3 million acre feet of its 3.54 million acre feet of total capacity. And as a reminder, last month, DWR had announced their initial allocation for the State Water Project contractor at only 10% of the requested supplies. However, further increases could happen. They are possible. It will depend on future conditions as we see it. And the final allocation from DWR is typically determined in May or June. So we have a few months still to go. For the Colorado River Basin area shaded, the blue shaded area on the right, the upper Colorado precipitation graphic is showing below normal at 5.9 inches or 78% normal. And the upper Colorado River snowpack graphic is showing below normal water content at 4 inches or 69% of normal for the state. This watershed is also dry, similar to California conditions. The graphic showing levels in Lake Powell have increased significantly during 2023 with 2.9 million acre feet more compared to last year. And this was a welcomed relief. As we know, it avoided the lake's elevation and level dropping near minimum power. So thanks to a very wet and snowy winter last year, the runoff was captured in Lake Powell, and some of that accumulated inflow was released into Lake Mead. So in summary, since the start of the water year, conditions have been very dry for both imported water supply watersheds, and it's still early in the year. For Metropolitan, there's a wide range of supply balances that remain possible. And regardless of the conditions that may materialize in the future, Metropolitan will continue to adhere to the water supply and demand management planning in order to capture the surplus water in normal to wet conditions, and also use stored water and drought actions if needed if there are drought conditions. So that concludes my report. And thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tammy. Director Deere,
No questions. Thank you. Good report.
Director Williams,
No, thank you.
Director Houston.
Yeah, I have a question on the project down in Lomita, Torrance, and parts of Los Angeles, pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe reliability program. I don't know how this works, but I'm assuming you'll tell us that Metropolitan, because it's their project, they own that pipeline, right? So they do all the outreach and work with those cities and planning, et cetera, correct? Is that-
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So in prior reports a few months ago, I had included a copy of their outreach material that they had provided. They canvassed the area. They noticed, they provided notice to a lot of the organizations in the area, you know, public areas where people would go to, that they would know, and see that and make it available. And then they have the website, they have a phone number, they have an email for any question. So they've definitely done a lot of outreach and activity in preparation for that.
And then these, I'll go back and look at it. It was in one of the previous packets.
Yes, it was. I want to say sometime in the summertime, but I can provide you another copy as well. See it.
And the other thing is, and I'll look at when you send it, but I'm assuming it's on certain streets, those neighborhoods and such. But then if people have issues, or even the city folks have issues, they usually want to contact Metropolitan direct, or do they sometimes contact West Basin? How does that work?
It could be either or because of the water supplier, the water retail agency. And we would hear about that if they contacted us. We have not heard anything from this particular project and upgrade, but yes, they would contact Metropolitan. And I mentioned they have their contact information to contact. But
Very good. Thank you. And the only thing, I think we skipped the federal report, just FYI, but other than that, thank you, Madam Chair, on this.
Would you like us to go back to that one?
I would, but I'm not the chair.
Madam Chair?
Thank you, Mark. What was the question?
Well,
Yeah.
at the conclusion of the state report, we jumped to the next item, and so we skipped over the federal affairs report. We do have a written
Oh, we
report from our federal lobbyist, BSA, and Matt could go back and present that item if you wish.
All right, Director Deere, is that okay?
Either alternative is okay with me. I read the report, so I don't need it. read back to me, so whatever you want to do is okay with me.
All right, does anybody need a presentation on the report? Director Houston,
Director-
Director Williams?
This is Director Houston. I would just, if Matt had something brief to tell us, because obviously the
Okay.
federal government's back in session, so I think it's relevant.
Yeah,
All right.
I have
thank you.
a quick presentation.
Sure,
I
Matt.
think we should
thank you.
hear it since he went through trouble.
Okay.
There was some good TV last night with the Republicans attacking each other. There is lovely.
It is that time of year. Thank you, Chairwoman Gray. I'll be real quick here. You know, as with the state legislature, the federal lawmakers face a very busy agenda on their return from winter break. And as you know, this is an election year, which always makes things more interesting. All the biggest fireworks probably won't happen until a little bit later this year, but it could happen throughout the year. I think the most pressing issue facing Congress in the next couple of weeks is to pass a budget deal or some other type of stopgap funding measure ahead of a January 19th deadline, at which time a partial government shutdown could occur. There's also a second deadline of February 2nd, when additional federal programs could be impacted by a separate shutdown. They have a few options to pass a year-long continuing resolution, a full 12-bill spending package called an omnibus, or smaller groups of spending bills called mini buses. We'll know more next week when the first deadline arrives next Friday, I believe. And then there's just a couple other updates in the report that I'll touch on. The first concerns water utility cybersecurity. So Congress and many states are currently evaluating the state of cybersecurity at water utilities after a number of attacks on some of the small town utilities. No major incidents have occurred yet, but it is something that the industry and government are both keeping an eye on. The EPA has tried stepping in by proposing some required auditing of cybersecurity of water systems, but there was some pushback which led to a judge to ultimately suspend that new rule. AWWA is also working to introduce some legislation in Congress to address the issue. There's some federal funding that's available to boost cybersecurity capabilities and programs, but that funding is available to several other major industries in addition to water, so it makes it very competitive. And while West Basin doesn't operate a drinking water system, we are still susceptible to potential cyber attacks at our ECL and satellite plants. And so it is an issue that our team takes very seriously, and that we'll continue to monitor. And then I know that Tammy touched on the Colorado River. I think I just add to that in mid-December, it was announced that several California water agencies to conserve up to 650,000 acre feet of water in Lake Mead at a cost of nearly $300 million. Agreements that have made that Tammy kind of alluded to, and these are being provided for by the Inflation Reduction Act. And so there is some concern that once the funding from the IRA dries up, that California and other states could face more challenges in getting support and funding from Congress in the future. Senator Alex Padilla has weighed in that Western lawmakers will continue to push for future funding, but that states should be ready in case that funding fails to materialize. So we're kind of at a point where the next couple of years look pretty good in terms of doing what needs to be done to keep the system healthy. But after that, it gets a little murkier. Finally, I know I mentioned this briefly, but West Basin will be making its annual visit to Washington, D.C. during the week of April 15th. So thank you to the directors for working with us to schedule that. We're currently working with VSA to put together the initial draft of list of meetings for you to review. And we'll plan to share that with you at next month's committee meeting, if not sooner. That concludes my federal report, and I'm happy to take any last questions from the director.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Any questions? All right.
Madam Chair, this is Director Houston.
Yes,
I don't have a question, just a comment. And I want to say thank you, Matt, because it is important. You know, obviously, both Sacramento back to business, but also Washington, D.C., which of course we all know is quite honestly a disaster. So hopefully they continue getting some deals passed to get government funded. But one thing I just read recently in the news was there's a rush to get the Colorado River agreements done before the end of this year, if at all possible, because everyone's concerned about the election. And if you do get a change in administration, of course, there's a huge potential setback while you get new people in place in multiple agencies. So, it makes sense. It is what it is. It's scary all the way around, but at the same time, I think it just puts more pressure on the water community, relevance of Colorado and what's going on with the 7 states, all the partners. So it's just something I know you're going to keep surprised of, but yeah, it's like we got a reprieve last year from the climate, but here we are really under politics pressure, quite frankly. I think people were working decently together, but now the heat's on. So anyways, never a dull day, right? Never a dull day in our water world. But thank you, Matt, for your feelings to ESA for this assistance. Offline, I'll talk to general manager and you about some meeting opportunities as well. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Really good job.
Thank you.
Good.
All right, again, thank you, Matt. Thank you for the report. Thank you, Tammy, everyone there, EJ, for the report and also the input from the directors. So what's the next item on the agenda? General Manager.
Madam Chair, we do not have any closed session items, and that brings us to director's comments and future agenda items.
Director's comments, please. Director.
No comments. Perhaps she should ask comments. You can ask her.
Director Williams.
He had to leave.
Okay, Director Houston.
No further comments. Thank you for all the
Thank
staff
you.
reports. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for all the reports this afternoon, and thank you, board members. And what's the next item?
Madam Chair, that's adjournment.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, everyone. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay.